Switch Pro mania strikes again. My goodness, it feels like just yesterday, Matthew, that we were talking about the Switch Pro and the insiders and the, you know, it's coming. It's got an OLED screen, and through all this mess, we have no Switch Pro yet. It's just a Switch OLED, but the rumors are coming again. This time, courtesy of Digital Foundry, which claims that due to their developer relationships, there was supposedly a mid-cycle refresh Switch with better specs. Take of that what you will. We will link the source of this claim inside of the podcast notes. You know, go take a listen and decide for yourselves, but we are here to discuss. So, Matthew, what is this show?
We the People.
We're We the People, your favorite weekly Nintendo podcast, coming at you, not live. The twin brothers that have been playing Nintendo games since like 1990 something. Anyway, so Digital Foundry has made this claim. It's very interesting, and we're here to talk about, was there ever a mid-cycle refresh? Was the Switch OLED that refresh? And, you know, things just got changed in the midst of all the happenings at Nintendo. And are we getting a new generation of Switch next year?
There's a lot of interesting talking points here because I feel like we've been hearing about some sort of upgraded Switch for years now. Like, I don't know the exact timeline for when the rumors started, but I feel like people have been talking about this since 2019 because I feel like it was before the pandemic, which started in March of 2020. So it's just really interesting because I feel like this has been going on for a really long time. And all of the insiders, some of them credible, some of them not, but have all been parroting this information. It sounds like it's something that so many people were so convinced of, that this is a thing, it is happening, it's coming at some point. And then, you know, it makes you question whether or not this actually ever was happening, or if people were fed some bad information, if what Digital Foundry said is true, that plans changed. I could see that being the case because Nintendo has a history of scrapping plans that they have for consoles or what they're going to do next. So it's just really interesting. I feel like there's a lot of different points to dissect here.
Yeah, and I am probably like a lot of you. I'm just so sick of hearing about a Pro Switch. Honestly, like, we'll get into the necessity or lack thereof of a mid-cycle Switch refresh. But yeah, I'll go right off the bat and say, like, I do believe this. I think the person in question sharing this information, it was like a guest on Digital Foundry's podcast. Like, I don't know. They don't have like one of those huge Twitter followings where they're trying to like drum up a lot of excitement. They don't have like a, you know, like a leaker blog or anything. And I think you can kind of see the difference in the way that people are talking about this. And, you know, it's no secret that there is a new Tegra chip that is a lot more powerful than the one that Nintendo Switch is currently using that would give it quite the edge in the technical department. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Nintendo's going to wrap that into a system and start selling it, mostly because, you know, if you haven't been around for the last, like, ever since the GameCube, Nintendo has not been on the latest and greatest technology. I mean, really, no console is. The PlayStation 5 is as close as you can get to a PC without building a PC, but, you know, it's noticeably weaker, and Nintendo does not play that game. It's a tough game to get those components and to hope that you make a profit on the system, and it didn't work out particularly well with the GameCube, and so they pivoted to their coveted Blue Ocean strategy that has since kind of faded with the Wii U, and now they're targeting the gamers again. But yeah, all that to say, like,
I was gonna say it's interesting because I feel like Nintendo was always ahead in the technology department all the way through the GameCube, aside from Sega. But if you look at compared to PlayStation, for example, I'm pretty sure the Nintendo 64 was more powerful than the original PlayStation, as well as the GameCube being more powerful than the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. And yet, PlayStation outperformed Nintendo's consoles in both of those console cycles. And so, you know, I think they just started to understand that we're not going to sell more systems by just having the best hardware. You know, we need to turn our priorities and attention to to other things, just like how PlayStation, PlayStation 2 was a huge hit, not because it was a powerhouse. It wasn't. I think it was the weakest console of the three at the time, but it had versatility. It had a DVD player. And so I think Nintendo started to realize we got to bring something else to the table rather than just having the most powerful console. So, it's interesting because I feel like ever since then, they've been far and away the weakest of all the consoles that are released now.
The interesting thing there too, though, is that while they had consoles that were at parity with their peers, they also did really annoying things. Like during the N64, they of course stuck with cartridges because you could control those a lot better. It was a lot harder to pirate games via cartridge as opposed to CD-ROM. And Nintendo could control the means of production of all their game cartridges and charge an arm and a leg for developers to get their games onto the system. And so they had done that through their first two systems, and they wanted to keep squeezing everybody, every penny that they could out of them. Meanwhile, PlayStation was much easier to develop for. And so that's how they lost so many so many of their third-party partners during that time. Final Fantasy VII could have been a Nintendo 64 game. Metal Gear Solid could have been a 64 game, but they chose to develop for PlayStation instead because they just had a much easier time. They're not dealing with such a corporate tyrant as Nintendo was at that time. And so it's tough to say, was the problem with the 64 that they were trying too hard to be cutting edge, or was it just, people getting sick and tired of Nintendo's awful working conditions as far as being a partner with them? But that's probably a discussion for another day. The larger point we're making here is that Nintendo's not in that business anymore, and they've struck out a niche for themselves. No one's really competing with Nintendo. And so this is where I get into the point of there's really no rush in launching a Switch successor. It's about the right time and the right set of features. Nintendo's not competing with anybody. You could say that they're competing with iPhones, and that's sort of true. There's only so much attention that people have during the day. There's lots of stuff cropping up, cool new mobile games and, other things to do on your phone. They're sort of competing with the other console partners in PlayStation, but you're not going to get Pokemon on your PlayStation. You're not going to get Smash Brothers there. So they're competing, but also they've got this niche where there's a very thick library of games that you can't get anywhere else, as well as the handheld factor. So they're kind of existing in this space in between mobile and console, and they're just completely taking ownership of it. And while Steam Deck has released, it's got some fanfare, I feel like that's going to continue to be more of a niche product, because the simple fact of the matter is when you're talking mass market, when you're trying to push tens of millions of units, the issue becomes, you need to kind of appeal to that lower common denominator. Grandma needs to understand what this is when she's buying it for her young whippersnapper around Christmas. And while Nintendo has a very easy to understand marketing pitch of just oh, you hold it in your hand, you could play it there, you dock it in the screen, you play it there. While the Steam Deck is so many more features and better specs, and you could pirate Nintendo games there and all this stuff. It's really not that much of a competitor, because it's just appealing to a different audience. And, speaking as someone who is incredibly enthusiastic about games, who has, I have even systems that are super obscure, like the Analog Pocket and the PS Vita TV. I have all these little gadgets and gizmos, but I could not bring myself to buy a Steam Deck because I just couldn't think about what I would do on that thing that I couldn't do on the Switch or the PC. And it's I love the concept. You got this gigantic Steam library that you can explore on handheld, but I don't want to be checking every single game to see how compatible it is with my system, and if I need to boot into a different operating system to make it work better and all of that stuff. And I love that they offer that level of customizability for people, but the appeal of consoles has always been the plug and play nature of them. PCs have always been better. They will always be better because you don't have to wait for a mid-console refresh to get something new going on your system. You just plug a new graphics card in every year or two when they come out with one of those. But I don't want to be tweaking the shadow settings on my games, especially now that I have 3 kids and they like playing games too. We plug, we play, we have a good time. And then, you know, of course it's all about the IP. So I don't feel like there's any pressure to release a Switch, especially with how well it's selling. Rumor has it that it's starting to slow down in sales, but you know, like, who's to say it doesn't have another holiday inside of it to, you know, keep pushing things. They do a couple bundles, they could do a couple of cool colors, you know, they release a few new killer apps like the new Zelda, new Donkey Kong, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. And for that reason, I don't think we're getting a Switch Pro or a Switch 2 next year. But what's your take on it?
No, yeah. So that's always been the biggest point against why I never thought the Switch Pro was real, which, excuse me, after seeing Digital Foundry talk about this, I have a lot more faith that it actually was real, because I think they've always been one of the most credible sources in the video game industry. And so I'm inclined to believe that now. But the reason I always thought it was nonsense is the same argument why I always would tell people that Mario Kart 9 is never going to be a game on the Switch. Because again, when you look at how well Mario Kart 8 is selling, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it's I can't remember if it's the best-selling game on the Switch or one of the top 3. I know it's up there, but
it's the best-selling game.
It's the best-selling game. Okay, so yeah, it's the best-selling game on the system. You just look at it from Nintendo standpoint, why in the world would you introduce another Mario Kart on this console when the one you have on there is continuing to sell and it's the best-selling game on the system? Even if it wasn't the best-selling game on the system, the fact that it's continuously moving copies, even though it's been out for what did it come out, 2018 on the Switch? Maybe even the release year? I can't remember. It's been out for years and it's still selling. I've seen some UK charts for the game over in the UK, and it'll still be in the top 10 charts for weekly results, which is just insane. I've never seen anything like that. That's why I've always said, to me, like, when people are optimistic about Mario Kart 9 coming to the Switch, I've always just been of the mindset that's never going to happen. It doesn't make sense if you're still selling so much of Mario Kart 8 to introduce another Mario Kart, because once you introduce Mario Kart 9, no one has any reason to purchase Mario Kart 8 Deluxe anymore, because they've got the new version now. Same thing with the Switch. To me, the Switch has been selling so darn well. It's on pace to be the best-selling console of all time, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't aware of the news you were just saying about the sales slowing down, but it's very close to the all-time record, if I'm not mistaken. And so if you're Nintendo and your system is selling as well as it has, why in the world would you introduce a different type of Switch? Now, I suppose you could make the argument that they introduced the Switch Lite, the OLED Switch, but those aren't clear competitors for the main Switch. You know, you're not looking at the Switch Lite and the OLED Switch and having a tough time deciding between those two and the regular Switch. Whereas the Switch Pro, I just feel like that's an easy decision for most consumers to go ahead and buy, because you're getting a better product. And so for me, why would you want to introduce another system into the marketplace right now that's going to directly compete with something that's selling really well? And so that's why I've just always felt like there's no good reason for Nintendo to do this. And, you know, after hearing Digital Foundry say it has a lot to do with the pandemic and the shortage of chips, which I can totally understand, I'm willing to bet money that it also has to do with the fact that Nintendo started looking at the financial side of things and understands that, hey, this is selling incredibly well. Why not squeeze every last drop out of this fruit before we introduce something new? And then that just gives you more time to develop the next platform. Like, it's the same thing with Mario Kart 9. I'm fully of the mindset that Mario Kart 9 is a finished game, because they've been talking about it for years, or, you know, insiders have. I think it's a finished game. I just think it's a finished game that's going to be a launch title for the next console. And that's why that makes more sense to me, is now you have this game that everybody's anticipating, and you can hold on to that to better sell the next platform that comes. But that's why, to me, again, like, why introduce a Switch Pro when you could just wait until the Switch sales die down, until we've gotten to that point where you want to introduce a new console into the marketplace and then release it? You know, so now it's not directly competing with your own product.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack there. First off, let's go over like the sales of the Switch. So it has surpassed the Wii, it's surpassed the PlayStation, and it is on pace to possibly best the Game Boy Probably not going to get to the level of Nintendo DS or PlayStation 2. Those systems each sold over 150 million units. So absolute monsters. Like, I don't know if we're getting there. That was a mixture of like just the most wide appeal ever. I mean, Brain Age was probably the most like genius marketing play for Nintendo with the DS. And then of course the PlayStation 2 at the time was cheaper than a DVD player. So like, why not? Because as you may know, consoles are typically sold at a loss. But yeah, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is almost 50 million units. So yeah, they're probably not going to release another one because they would cannibalize each other. That's why I don't think we're getting a Mario Odyssey 2. Maybe DLC eventually for Mario Odyssey, but the problem with the Mario Odyssey 2 is that it would not perform as well as the original. I think is probably their line of thinking. If you look back to the Wii, you know, Mario Galaxy 1 sold almost 13 million copies, but Galaxy 2 sold about half that. Of course, it wasn't as expensive to develop, but, you know, these are just the things that are probably going through their mind. We don't usually get more than one of these tentpole games per console generation, Zelda being the exception, because there's just a team that makes Zelda games, and that's all they do.
Well, I think it's a good point that you bring up Mario Galaxy, because I feel like in retrospect, Nintendo probably wishes that they held on to that game for the Wii U, because I think that would have been a great game to help move units on the Wii U. And I think the Wii U was severely lacking in variety with a lot of its games. They had a lot of 2D platformers, but I don't really remember them having any 3D platformers. So it's interesting in retrospect, because I think that's a perfect example of why Nintendo probably looked at that and was like, that wasn't a smart move.
Yeah, and I am probably the largest Mario 3D World apologist in the world. I like those games more than the Galaxy games. I feel like the Galaxy games, like, you take out the space theming and they're just like kind of slow Mario 64, which is still fantastic. Don't get me wrong, and I love the space theming and all that stuff. But I love the moment to moment kinetic energy of 3D World. But yes, there was a missing spot for that exploratory Mario 3D platformer. And, you know, if Zelda had come a little earlier, maybe that could have helped things. But yeah, a Galaxy sequel probably would have helped, because that game would have shined a lot more in HD than the kind of toy-like diorama art style of Mario 3D World. And so, yeah, there's a big problem that Nintendo has, and it's with following up with a sequel. Whenever they have made one system after the last one, like a subsequent system, it has not sold anywhere near as well as the original. So let's go through a few examples. We're talking about the Wii, sold 100 million units. The Wii U, 13 million. Ouch. We got the Nintendo DS, 154 million units. Yowza. Then we've got the Nintendo 3DS. I'm trying to find this on the list. 75 million. Very respectable, but just, you know, not the type of success that I'm sure Nintendo would like to see. We've got the Game Boy / Game Boy Color selling 118 million units, and the Game Boy Advance coming in at 80 million. So these transitions have not particularly been great for them. On the other spectrum with PlayStation, man, they've seen they've seen a lot of success. So they start strong with the PlayStation at 100 million units, PlayStation 250. We're living good. And here's the mistake that Nintendo doesn't want to make. When you come out with your new system, pricing has got to be right. PlayStation 3 released at a absolutely ridiculous price point, and they really suffered for that. And they had to play catch up the entire generation and invest tons of money into lots of incredible new PlayStation IP to like bring it back.
Which is a shame, because the PlayStation 3 might be the best PlayStation in terms of game lineup. I loved the PlayStation 3. I mean, you and I can attest to just how many incredible games were on there. And for a while, when we were living together in an apartment, we were getting so much mileage out of the PlayStation 3. So, but it just opened up at $600, which it's funny because even the PlayStation 5, for as powerful as it is, opened at $399 and $499. So it just shows you that there's just a certain price at which consumers are just not willing to go there for a video game system.
Yeah, and not to turn this into a PlayStation podcast, but yeah, PlayStation 3 had like, you know, pound for pound, best library, best like support. Online was a little wonky, whatever. PlayStation Plus was the best it ever had been.
Oh my gosh, it was
Little
so good.
Big Planet. We got PlayStation All-Stars for the weirdos out there. Yeah, lots of good Ratchet titles. Those HD recompilations that they did on PlayStation 3.
PlayStation All-Stars, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, even the small ones like Puppeteer, what a fantastic system. But you know, it's like, it just goes to show that these marketing messages and these like sort of, you know, front of the box features really do matter in the long run. Like, they matter a lot more than a lot of the things that people worry about. Like, oh, what are the specs? What is the battery life? It doesn't matter. The Nintendo Switch battery life is wholly unimpressive, but it's still selling like hotcakes because you look at the commercial and you just get it. You get exactly what you're getting. And it's interesting to see, you know, Nintendo struggled to find their footing with just making another one when PlayStation has found so much success outside of the PlayStation 3 in doing it, because the PlayStation 4 turned out great. You know, very respectable, like incredible 117 million units and counting, and the PlayStation 5 is opening to great success. You know, we've kind of got a early Wii thing where the supply was constrained, and so people are probably buying them faster than they otherwise would if it was just, you know, readily available. But that's neither here nor there. Nintendo does not stick the landing, traditionally speaking, in this arena, and that's very difficult for them. Even going back to the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Super Nintendo, NES has beat almost twice as much, as many units sold. But yeah, it's difficult to think of being in Nintendo's shoes to do this. And so that, yeah, I mean, they're not chomping at the bit to release a new system. They are really trying carefully to like, what's that wacky new feature that's going to get you to buy this? What is that extra pizzazz that we can throw on? And I like their thinking and not having a mid upgrade. You know, I think that kind of confuses the messaging, especially when your target audience is much less obsessed with the specs and all of that stuff. You're going to confuse parents on Christmas thinking like, oh, what's the difference between the 2DS and the new 3DS and the 3DS XL? I think you just got three models. You got the good one, the better one, and the best one. Plain and simple. And you know what they do after that, I have no idea. I don't know how you're marketing this.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that was a big reason why I think the Wii U was a complete failure. I think it simply was because of its name. And people might think that's silly. You can talk about the lineup of games they released and how long it took them to start releasing better games and all these other reasons. But I'll never forget when I used to work a retail job, and I was working with a woman who was telling me how she had to rush to get her purchase done in our store because she had to hurry along to the game store to pick up a new console. And she was talking about how he likes all the systems, but she was going to get him the new PlayStation. I think it was the PlayStation 4 at the time. And I was asking her which console she had, and she told me the Wii was one of them. And I was like, well, you know, the Wii U's out. That's the newest Nintendo console. And she was like, well, no, he already has the Wii. And I'm like, well, no, the Wii U is a brand new system. And she's like, what, is that just like a stronger version or something? I'm like, no, it's its own thing. It's a completely new console. But just the bad name alone, I think, really hurt that system because it was just confusing for the common consumer. You know, they're just looking at it as like a slightly better thing. And that's why I think even to that point, the idea of a Switch Pro is silly, because I feel like if it's got anything with the name Switch in it, to the average consumer, they're not going to look at that and understand the distinct difference. They're just going to think it's an alternative Switch. And so if you already have one, there's no point in purchasing it. And so that's why I think they're really just holding on to whatever idea they have, and they're going to release it as it's a brand new console. It's going to have a completely different name so that there's no distinction problem there. One other thing I wanted to touch on, by the way, is, and I don't know that we've addressed this in the show yet, but when I was telling you about how convinced all the insiders were for so long that there was a new Switch Pro coming, the funniest thing to me is when Mario Rabbids, what's the new one called? It's Sparks of Hope, I believe. Do you remember when that game was shown off and people were commenting on, and there was all these people, and I felt like it was so, when you look back at it now, it was so asinine because all these people were basically just lying or they had bad information. But when all these people were tweeting out, you notice this Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope trailer looks really, really good, better than most Switch games. Anyway, enjoy. And it's just, they were hinting at the whole idea that the footage was taken from a more powerful Switch and used to market that game, whereas insinuating that the actual game was going to look worse, or the game was going to look worse on the actual Switch. And I just think that's so funny in retrospect because, like I said, I mean, those people essentially just made that up. Or like I said, if we're assuming positive intent, they were fed bad information. But it's just funny how nobody's had anything to say to those people. And I'm like, man, that's just hilarious when you look back on it, because I swear I heard that, not even just for that game, but for other titles as well. And it was complete nonsense.
Yeah, I think that game companies do that. You know, they're developing the game on computers, and sometimes the final optimizations and all that stuff haven't been done yet. So things can look better in the trailer than they do on the system. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. And that's the power of the Mario Odyssey, or not Mario Odyssey, but the Mario Galaxy theming is just like that art style looks so good. I mean, you can go back to this day and look at it on a Wii and you're like, this is gorgeous. This is beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the insider game. I'm not going to pretend to. I mostly don't pay attention to it because, like, I mean, the things are going to come out when they're going to come out, and you know, the only type of baseless speculation that I enjoy is the fun stuff like this. We just rack our brains thinking of the just terrible situation that Nintendo's in. I think the new system has got to have some sort of wacky Wii DS normie sort of thing. And I mean, I think that this can work as long as they sort of separate it. You know, because the Switch has had great success with the casual market of games. You know, Ring Fit Adventure did great. I don't know how successful Labo was, but you know, they have like a good amount of these casual games. And as long as you can kind of integrate them in a way where they are complementary to the entire experience of the console rather than dominating the marketing messaging, then I think it's going to be a good time indeed for all the gamers involved. And yeah, I'm just looking now. Ring Fit Adventure outsold Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu. If that doesn't sound impressive, I don't know what does. It's hard though, man. That game is really difficult. I stopped playing it because you know, it makes me sweat too much. Anyway,
well, and you even talking about Pokemon Let's Go and how it didn't sell anywhere near what Pokemon typically sells. I mean, that just further illustrates this point that a lot of times when you introduce some sort of alternative into the marketplace, it doesn't seem to catch on the way that like the normal one does. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I think that's another example of why it just doesn't make sense to, here's another version, because I'd be willing to bet the Switch OLED and the Switch Lite didn't, like, how should I say this? I don't think they work in a way where they're adding to the total sales of Switches. I think people are just deciding between which one of the three they want to purchase. Not, I already have a Switch and now I want one of these on top of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. At the same time, you know, like, I mean, I think in Pokemon's case, they're just pumping out as much Pokemon content on the Switch as possible, to, you know, cause someone will buy it. But yeah, I don't know. In some sense you're like, oh yeah, successor to the Switch, more powerful Switch, instant buy. But I don't know if that's getting like the normies and the parents as much as it's getting the gamers, which the gamers do not make as enough of a market for Nintendo to just like completely concentrate on them. We do not make up that the Wii U faithful, as it were. People who are just going to buy it no matter what. But yeah, it's going to be difficult because, you know, additionally in these like console generations, the interesting thing will also be that PlayStation 5 hasn't really departed from PlayStation 4. PlayStation 5 for the most part is just like an up-res PS4. You know, you can play the God of War at the better frame rate, but it's the same game. And that's, you know, it's great. I enjoy mine, but I think to date, there's only been like 3 to 5 absolute exclusive games that you're like, oh man, this is a PlayStation 5 game. And the Switch is going to have an interesting time with that as well. You know, of course, whatever system they come out with next needs to be backwards compatible. And I think they will. Nintendo's mostly had a track record of backwards compatibility outside of the Switch, you know, because they wanted to charge $60 for all those Wii U games that you already bought. And, you know, I get it. Like, it's not like a one-to-one move, but I think whatever system they're coming out with next isn't going to be so different that you couldn't think of a way to make games backwards compatible. I don't think you're going to have to emulate a Switch in order to play old Switch games. I think they're going to make the architecture work in such a way where it is sort of that seamless transition that we're seeing PlayStation and Xbox do. But I don't know. And with them letting out Zelda this February, I don't know what that killer app is that they're going to have at launch that's like ready to push units in this. What would be absolutely crazy is if they had some kind of wacky, ambitious, incredible 3D Donkey Kong game, and all this is coming out November of next year. But
yeah, I mean,
but I think 2023 is early.
I would be really happy if that were the case, but I already told you, I think it's Mario Kart 9. I think that's what they're going to lead with because, again, you got to think Mario Kart 8, the original, came out in, what, 2013 or 14? Like, it came out a long time ago, and Mario Kart Deluxe was the exact same game, just with all the add-on content already in the final purchase. And I know they're making DLC courses now, but if you can't see the difference between how good the courses look in the base game versus the DLC courses, like it is a very distinctive difference. So you can tell that they're not putting their heavy hitters behind it, so to speak, or really putting the development time and creating these courses like they did for the base game. But I absolutely believe it's Mario Kart 9. I think they look at the selling power of Mario Kart on literally every console. Mario Kart Wii sold like crazy. And even on the Wii U, I think Mario Kart 8 might have been the best selling game on that system as well. So I think, like I said, they haven't made a new Mario Kart game in almost 10 years now. And so I absolutely believe they've got a new Mario Kart game that's close to being finished, if not already finished, and they've been developing it on this new hardware, and they're just holding on to it to lead with that. Because what better game to lead with than that? I know The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you know, was an all-time great game that people really loved. That was a great game to lead with, but nothing touches Mario Kart, like, at all. So I just think that to me is what I think we should expect whenever that new system rolls around. But like I said, I don't think Nintendo's in any rush to put out a new console. I really don't, because you were just talking about how Switch sales have been slowing down, but I was just reading about it while we were on the show, and they attribute a lot of that to the chip shortage as well, that's been hurting them. But you got to think, man, with the new Zelda game coming out, I already forgot the name of it, but it's the sequel to the Breath of the Wild. With that coming out, you know, the rumored Donkey Kong game, you know, there's just way too many very credible people who have been talking about that. You know, you and I were starting to get skeptical because we hadn't heard anything about the game, and they've been talking about it for a couple years now. But seeing the Mario trailer and how Donkey Kong looks a little different, and the fact that that movie's coming out in April, you just can't help but wonder if maybe they've been waiting to release this game alongside the movie or in pretty close proximity to. And so I think that's another game we can expect. There's also, I know we forget about it all the time, but Metroid Prime 4. Nintendo has a lot of games either confirmed to be coming out or rumored to be coming out that I think will help boost the sale of systems. And so I like I said, I don't think they're in any rush to move on to a new system, especially again, because everything is attributed to this chip shortage. They're going to try and hold on to this as long as they can. And, you know, to me, like, I don't think they want to be in a situation like Sony was with the PlayStation 5, even though I would argue the PlayStation 5 has only sold as well as it has because the supply has been constrained. And so people, heck, I even bought a PlayStation 5 just because of how rare you and Trevor were telling me they were. I was in no rush to buy one, but when you know that you can't get them anywhere, that they're always sold out, and when I saw one readily available to buy, I pulled the trigger on it, you know? That's the only reason I did. I think that's the only reason a lot of people have, because they know if they don't buy it then, they might not have a chance for a very long time. And so, you know, but I don't think Nintendo wants to go down that road. You know, I don't think they want to be in a situation where people are having trouble finding their systems. And so, yeah, I think the Switch is here to stay for at least a few more years.
Yeah, I mean, they sure do have quite the pipeline of games that they haven't even opened the floodgates on. And we're seeing the full, like, advantage from a game lineup perspective of having both of your sort of handheld and your console departments working in tandem instead of having to split the defense and make games for two systems. But yeah, at the same time, I've always wondered if by combining the two into one that Nintendo would expect something that was like better than the two being separate, you know, because like they can't put the genie back in the bottle. You know, I think if they made a dedicated handheld now, and in like a dedicated console, I just think that I mean, maybe in 20 years, but like for now, like they are the hybrid console maker. And yeah, it's just, while the chip shortage is slowly beginning to ease and like Nintendo's had to cut their expectations of how many consoles they will sell, through the fiscal year, I think that, I think that 2023 is like way too soon, given the context. And yeah, I like your idea of Mario Kart 9 being the killer app, the kingmaker of that new system. They've had, you know, like what, 1 million years to work on it. So, so hopefully it's got some cool new thing that people are just, you know, really clamoring for. And yeah, I think otherwise they're just going to keep trucking along. I mean, they've got plenty of other levers to pull in terms of software that will keep people coming back, you know. And there's a lot more complaints nowadays of the Switch's lack of finesse in the technical sense, now that we've seen what the Steam Deck can do, and now that we're like more acclimated to the PlayStation 5. They're definitely going to need to do it soon, but I think as long as PlayStation is sort of dragging its feet in committing to a new console generation, I think Nintendo's safe. Because the big concern for Nintendo is going to be, when do we stop making stuff like Doom for the Switch? When do we stop making, you know, these third-party games that are big sellers and that we get lots of licensing for? Some people double dip because they want the handheld and the console version. When do we stop getting these titles? And at that point, the pressure is going to be on to get something that can, you know, sort of be the low-res version of the PlayStation 5. You know, something that can handle a game that's designed for that power level, and they can just kind of, you know, tone it down. But, you know, at this point, I don't know if PlayStation 4 is ever going away. You know, it's just like the time would have been now to do that, but they just keep putting their biggest games like God of War and Horizon, not only on PS4, but on PC. And so we're just getting to this point where maybe it's not about console generations anymore. Maybe we're experiencing this paradigm shift where it's going to be more about software and more about software services. Nintendo's pivoted into putting a lot more effort into their online infrastructure. And of course, it's like the Coco Melon of online services, where it's just very, very basic. But, you know, if they see profits from that, they can invest more in that and extract more from their customer base. As PlayStation has made extra investments into services like PlayStation Now, and you got Xbox, of course, with Game Pass, that is just a giant pit of, you know, losing money. But, you know, at some point they'll be able to turn the profit switch on with that. That's the hope anyway. But, you know, what isn't being sort of tallied here is that even on the Wii, you know, you look at the Wii, and like, it had incredible reach, and certain titles like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Mario Kart Wii were sold like 30 million units. That's crazy. But, you know, the more gaming centric titles like Super Smash Brothers and Mario Galaxy sold more around 10 to 15 million. For the Switch, the attach rate is just absolutely bonkers. To think that, you know, nearly 1 in 2 people that have a Switch own Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is insane. And you've got almost the same with Animal Crossing New Horizons. 40 million units sold on that. We've got Smash having sold 30 million units, and you know, they just keep putting out these bangers. And of course, they've got, you know, Pokemon's going to take its place on the throne, its undeserved throne, as well as, you know, Tears of the Kingdom will probably, I don't think it'll do as well as the first one, but it's gonna do pretty well. And whatever new Donkey Kong game, like they just keep putting out hits. And so I think that, like, even when you look at it that way, it's not too bad that they're not ready to launch yet. But, you know, all that being said, I think it's if I had to guess, I'm guessing, you know, early 2025 is when the new Switch is going to come.
Yeah, that's what I said too. I think 8 years. 8 years is, I think, pretty standard. 7 to 8 years for new consoles to come out. But yeah, I just think there's a lot of options they still have to play with, because even aside from those new confirmed and rumor games I was mentioning before, they also have a lot of they have a very large well they can dip into as far as remakes are concerned. We're already seeing it with Kirby's Return to Dreamland, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Kirby game that's from the Wii. There's a lot of other games, even from the Wii U, that they still haven't ported over, such as Yoshi's Woolly World, Star Fox Zero. There's another one I'm forgetting. And they're seeing profits from those Switch ports. Even Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, you know, the Wii U version sold over 2 million units, which was really good, seeing as the Wii U sold, what, like 11 million units or something in total?
Yeah, 13
20
million
million.
total.
I don't know what it was. 13 million, yeah. But Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on the Switch has sold between 4 and 5 million. So that's more than doubled what it did on the Wii U, even though it was a port. And I think some of the other ports, I don't have all the numbers from the other ones they've released, but I think they've all done pretty well, except for some of those more niche games like Xenoblade, for example. But even then, those appeal to a very small and niche market anyway. And so you're not typically going to see crazy numbers for games like that. So I just think they still have a very large backlog they can dip into, even the rumored Metroid Prime trilogy port.
You say that about Xenoblade and some of those more niche titles, but like the low bar for what a Nintendo published title can do has been lifted so high, it's kind of insane. You know, like 2 million was pretty impressive on the Wii U for Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Basically everything hits that now. You know, like I know Xenoblade crossed that threshold, Fire Emblem Three Houses crossed that threshold, and all these series that have traditionally been very niche are finding their audience on Switch. And you know, it's pretty incredible to see, because like we just haven't seen like attach rates on this attach rates like this on any other system. But, you know, I think that has to do with a lot of things, like gaming becoming much more of a like commonplace hobby, whereas like it was kind of a basement dweller thing when I was growing up. And, you know, as they get familiar with like younger audiences and older audiences, the gaming populace is increasing. But but yeah, I mean, even those like no name titles are doing crazy numbers. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that Nintendo could continue to put out just like unique stuff, and they've got such deep pockets as far as like what they could do with their IP that they haven't touched in a while. We haven't gotten a Star Fox game. We haven't gotten a F-Zero game. Like there's a lot of things that they could do that could really impress, and it, you know, if nothing else, just kind of reinvigorate a fan base that has gone kind of dormant. But yeah, I think there's no rush on this thing. That like console generations, that whole like exciting shift that we're used to growing up with, and like looking at the new system and like, oh my gosh, this one looks so much better than the last. I think those days are kind of coming to a close, and it's been a long time coming, but yeah, I mean, I think the PlayStation 5 has got to be the like least exciting console generation shift that I have ever experienced. And it's getting the same way with technology in general. You know, the new iPhone is not that much cooler than the old iPhone. You know, we're just kind of polishing and spit shining it every year, giving it like, you know, a slightly better camera, a slightly better this and that. And, you know, what Apple has always done to keep interest in their products high is that they usually have some sort of goofy little feature that really gets you interested. You know, I remember portrait mode for like when that was the thing with like the iPhone 7 or 8 or whatever, and it's like, oh wow, you could never take pictures like this on a camera, and it's just kind of a goofy little thing that imitates bokeh, but it sells. You know, people look at that stuff, and it's something to sort of latch onto. And you know, the PlayStation 5, it's just like, man, I can play God of War. That's eventually going to come to a PC, and that'll be the best version of it. That'll be the most impressive version of it. But I can play the slightly better than I was with my PS4. And the Switch, we're looking at the same thing, unless there's some kind of like killer new feature, or like, I don't know, you strap a Joy-Con to your head and there's head rumble. You could you strap a Joy-Con to your tongue and you can taste the game.
Well, I was going to say, I think, you know, and we've always said this about you referenced the smartphone industry. I've always said this, that like the biggest problem that I think technology has in general, whether it's gaming consoles, smartphones, whatever the case may be, it's just that there's not a noticeable difference anymore. And because we've almost peaked in a lot of areas. You know, you think about even with home media, for example, going from VHS tapes to DVDs, and how big a jump that was, and why it caught on as well as it did. But then you look at the jump from DVD to Blu-ray, and Blu-ray didn't really catch on the way people thought it would. But that's because the difference wasn't as noticeable, and also because Blu-rays are just Blu-ray movies are just way more expensive for whatever reason, just to make it bluer. I don't know. I was never a big fan of Blu-ray, but it's the same thing with the smartphone market, where the difference between the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 5 was a huge difference between the 5 and the 6. But now, as you've gotten later, you know, between the iPhone 11 and 12 and 13 and whatever they're on now, there's just not a noticeable difference. They hardly look any different. And so, you know, to the original point of the game systems, I've been saying that for so long now. Like, if you look at consoles back in the day, you know, the NES to the Super Nintendo to the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube, those were all like quantum leaps, so to speak. The same thing from the PlayStation to the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3. These were huge transitions. But you look at from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5, and while there are many differences, if you really get into the nitty-gritty, to the average consumer, it doesn't look that different. It really doesn't. And also, there's not many games that fully take advantage of the new hardware. You look at games like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and all the hardware features that they take advantage of, like as far as moving between the rifts, the ray tracing, all that good stuff, you can see it on full display, but you look at a lot of other games on the system and you can't really distinctly see those differences. And so I think that's the biggest problem, you know, as far as the technology arms race goes, is that you just can't distinguish between the differences the way you used to. You used to feel like you were getting something twice as good when you were moving from one console to the next, or one smartphone to the next, or one home media player to the next. Now, the difference is hardly noticeable. So, and I think that's another reason why, why introduce a Switch Pro when you just introduce a new console that you have to get in order to get the new games like a Mario Kart 9, like a Super Smash Bros. 6, whatever it is, because the difference between the Switch now and the next Switch is probably not going to be a huge leap unless it ends up being on par with the new Xbox and PlayStation 5. In that case, I think you would notice a big difference because the Switch is more on par with, I don't know. Is it even on par with the PlayStation 4? I don't even think it's on that level.
Yeah, I mean, it's a low res PS4, which, as a handheld, like, that's awesome. You can play your PS4 games on the go. You kind of do that with the Vita, but we're not going to talk about the Vita, that misunderstood masterpiece. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be tough. And I think, like, it's weird because you want the next system to use the same Joy-Cons that you've bought and rebought and rebought and rebought because of the drift. You want to, like, be able to use your Pro controller and bring a GameCube controller to Smash, but yeah, like, is it going to be enough? They need that, like, X factor. And I think that the thing we haven't talked about, which I think is the most intriguing to me, is that this is going to be the first system that they launch entirely outside of the influence of Satoru Iwata as well as Reggie Fils-Aimé. And both of those players are very important in this equation because, of course, Iwata was, one of the masterminds who, crafted this whole, like, Wii DS era, and eventually the Switch, the Wii U was, like, a big miss on their part, but whatever. I would, hot take alert, like, the Wii U's actually, like, a great idea. It was just, like, kind of the wrong timing. Bad system sales do not equate bad system. Like, you can have, like, plenty of things to criticize the Wii U for, mostly just that it didn't get the third-party support it needed, so the game library was very thin. But, like, those ideas on display, like the asynchronous multiplayer of, like, Rayman Legends or Nintendo Land, are amazing, and I wish they would have gotten to breathe a little bit more. And it's similar with the Vita. Like, sometimes you kill your whole system by a bad marketing campaign or a couple of bad decisions that don't have a whole lot to do with the system. But, like, the idea of, like, the Miiverse social media platform, kind of ahead of its time. Like, if that was, like, a 2000 like, 18 idea instead of a 2012 whenever the Wii U came out, like, I feel like it would have caught on more. Like, I think that there was a lot of great ideas on display for the Wii U, most notably the hybrid gaming concept, was in its nascent state there. You had the whole experience of, like, oh, I want to watch something on the TV. Oh, let me take it down to the portable version. And I played a lot of Tropical Freeze that way with my wife having something on the TV, and I'm doing the time trials on the couch. That came from the Wii U, and obviously, like, the technology wasn't quite there. It was the wrong timing, but when they were able to, like, contain the entire system on the tablet, all of a sudden I get it now. And so yeah, the Wii U, I mean, yeah, that's a bad mark on its record. That has a lot to do with, like, the marketing and certain things that they were doing at the time that they have learned from. But I think that it's going to be very interesting to see, like, without kind of the marketing prowess of Reggie and the incredible ideas of Iwata, like, what we're getting into here. At the same time, I'm excited because, we're also going into a generation with a Sakurai-less Smash Brothers. He's announced his semi-retirement, and I think that while he will still obviously consult on the game, he's not, like, committing to a director's position, I don't believe, or at least I hope so. I'm ready to see someone else's take on it. I think, like Namco knows how to make fighting game sequels and what the kind of core fighting game audience will want from them. And then you want Sakurai to pepper in, his cool ideas for, like, how to bring casuals in, the ideas like Subspace or 8-player or whatever. But, like, I'm excited to see that, Smash get a little bit of a reboot, but But yeah, it's also going to be hard to top Ultimate, you know, just the sheer impressive feat of having like nearly 100 characters and, you know, having all these like different people. Like, who knows, like PlayStation's trying really hard to lock down Square Enix as like pretty much an exclusive developer for them. And it's like, are we getting that deal next time on Nintendo? I don't know. But yeah, that's the X factor here that I feel like is going a little unnoticed, is like that, like, man, there's a lot of key people that made these big launches possible that have passed the torch. And so we'll see. But
well, I was going to say, you know, when you were referencing the Wii U and how it was a little ahead of its time, I think even in the sense it had some of the utility I think some people would have been interested in. From, you know, how the PlayStation 2 people love that you could play DVDs. I thought it was really interesting on the Wii U that you could use apps. I can't remember if Netflix was on there, but I know Hulu was, and how you could be watching a TV show from the Wii U tablet while somebody else has got a different TV show or movie playing on the television. And I thought that was a really interesting concept that I think would have worked well for families who, you know, maybe the kids want to watch one thing, the adults want to watch something else. And that was a neat way to do that. And so I think the Wii U had a lot of cool features that could have caught on. But I think, like I said, I think it's all due to the confusing name and the lack of marketing behind it. So there was no help for the people that were confused about the Wii U. And it's funny because I think the code names for these systems are always so much better than what they come out to be. Like, I remember the original Wii was going to be called the Nintendo Revolution, which I think would have been an incredible name because nobody had seen anything like the Wii when we got that. And then the Wii U was going to be called the Nintendo Stream, which again, I think that's not the most mind-blowing name or by any stretch, but I think it delivers the message to an extent. You know, the Nintendo Stream, okay, I'm able to stream my stuff on this tablet, you know, and those two work in conjunction. And so I think those would have been perfect names for those systems. Obviously the Wii worked out, but the Wii U, I think if they had called it literally anything else, even if it was the Wii 2, I think that would have been better. And that's why I think with the Switch, they just called it a name that helps you understand what it is. And especially because Nintendo is always designing a console these days with some sort of gimmick in mind, I think you need a name that is clear to the function of the system in order to help it succeed. So yeah, it's a real shame that the Wii U didn't catch on, because I do think they had a lot of really neat stuff going for it, but it was just a comedy of errors to the name, the lack of marketing, the fact that there wasn't a huge variety in the games they were offering. It just was, you know, not a good plan that they had for that system.
Yeah, it was a shame to see the Wii U go out like it did, but yeah, the naming convention will be interesting, because yeah, a Switch 2. I mean, we're sort of conditioned by smartphone culture to think that like, okay, number 2 means like, you know, like it's better obviously, but I can still do all the same stuff that I did on my first one on the second one, and so like I don't need a second one. It just be like nice to have, and I do think that's a possible error that they can fall into. Because yeah, what do you name this thing? The Switch is so perfect. The Nintendo Switcheroo, you know, like just add a little pizzazz on it. But yeah, I think I think it's interesting. You know, I also wonder if they might do some sort of thing like a souped up dock that like gives it extra power when it's you know, like kind of like you can dock a computer, you can dock a few like extra graphics cards into a computer and plug it in. If they might do something like that and like leverage the current Switch models to like upsell you on like a dock or something. But yeah, but that wouldn't make as much money and like create as much of a splash. And yeah, I don't know what you do, but I'm also like, you
should just call it the Super Nintendo Switch. I think that, just like how you had the NES and then the SNES, I think that would work, just as long as it's not the Switch Pro. I've always thought the Switch Pro was such a dumb name, but that's just me personally. Yeah, I mean, it's like a helpful moniker because like everybody knows what it means. I think the problem with these naming conventions can often be like, okay, but like, what do you mean? You know, I was like, I used to work at an Apple store, and I
could not for the life of me like remember like what is an iPad versus the new iPad, and like how that kind of like there would be like these kind of internal names like, oh, this is iPad 5th generation or something like that, and like, okay, so that's what it is. That's the one that I need to pay attention to. It gets so confusing when you don't have something helpful. So like going with something that's sort of understood, like, oh, this is the Switch Pro. It's like a slightly better version of it, like just like the Pro controller. The problem they can run into is like if they do like Nintendo Switch Plus, it's like what does that mean? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you call it. I think you call it the Nintendo Switcheroo. And that's, hey man, we're getting back to, but you do the Nintendo Switcheroo, but it's like with a U instead of 2 O's, you know, like the Wii U.
Yeah, just don't do the Switch U.
Switch
because you're the one switching it. You know, the whole Wii U, because it's Wii and U. I just always thought that, gosh, I just want to know who really greenlit that name. They're like, this is good, that'll work. It's just hilarious. Yeah. But yeah, no, and Switch Pro I think makes sense. But, you know, I just think they're probably going to have to, honestly, I think a Switch 2 would probably be the best name for whatever system they come out with next, if it ends up being like the Switch. And I think whatever they do from here on out is going to be like the Switch, you know, because they've kind of just abandoned the handheld market and just combined it all into one. So I think that's something they're going to have to do going forward. They've almost, I can't think of the term, but bound themselves to the idea of creating a hybrid console, because I don't know how you go back, you know, and do something completely different now. But, you know, we'll see what happens.
You cannot go back. It's not a possibility. Like we're not doing that. But yeah, I think we've sufficiently beaten this horse. So, but I don't know, you know, what do you guys think? You think we're getting a new Switch this year? I would like a new Switch. You know, I miss that feeling of like, ooh, new console generation. I have very fond memories of getting the Switch with you at the mall late at night, and then, you know, going home to play Breath of the Wild, not sleeping the entire day. You know, I think I had good times and good memories with that whole kit and caboodle, but yeah, I wonder if those days are kind of gone. Like not to say that I don't even like my PS5. You know, I love the Miles Morales game and the Sackboy game that came, you know, at the same time as the new system, but like, you know, I'd be lying if I was telling you that it felt the same as like getting, you know, the Game Boy Advance or getting the Nintendo DS, you know, those same sort of like big leaps that we have become accustomed to. But, you know, what do I know? I thought the Switch Lite was the dumbest idea that anybody could ever come up with, a Switch that does not switch. But, you know, here I am. They've sold plenty of them. People don't seem to have a problem with them. Sure, they drift, but, you know, all you have to do is send your entire system to Washington. But yeah, that's about all I got. What are your closing thoughts, Matthew?
Just to kind of sum up everything, I feel I always thought this was not true. Now I'm convinced that there was some sort of upgraded Switch coming, but I think Nintendo, you know, they can, you know, it may be because of the shortage of chips or because of the pandemic, but I think there probably had to be business reasons that went into that as well. Just seeing that there's not a lot to gain, where you could just take whatever you've got and hold on to that as a new console. And you know, will probably likely have a killer lineup for that, starting with games like a Mario Kart 9, maybe like a new Super Smash Bros. Since it's been 4 years since Ultimate came out, you know, so I think you've got a lot to play with there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I'm not expecting anything new anytime soon. I think the Switch is here to stay for at least 2 more years, possibly 3. So yeah, it should be interesting to see what games we get along the way. But also do want to say, if you enjoy this content, please subscribe, like the videos on YouTube, as well as subscribing and liking the videos on your podcasting service of choice, as it helps boost ratings and helps new people find us. So it's always much appreciated if you do enjoy the content. So just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, well, and if we could ask you to do one thing, what's helpful in the early stages of the podcast is, going on your podcast service of choice and leaving a review on there helps a lot with discoverability and, sort of breaking through that initial rush. So we appreciate you listening to the show. Let us know if there's any other topics you want us to cover and do these deep dives into. Otherwise, we will be back next week with another We the People.